7 flights, to missing videos, and one secret list that could shatter Washington forever. On live television, Jasmine Crockett confronts Donald Trump with bombshell evidence linking him to Jeffrey Epstein. But what happens next will twist the story in ways no one expected. Gasps, outrage, and silence fill the chamber as truths buried for decades finally surface. The only question is, when the last secret explodes, will it destroy Trump alone, or take America down with him? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The red banner slashed across every television screen in America. Live. Capitol hearing on the Epstein cover-up. For a moment, the nation froze. Forks paused midair in diners, office phones went unanswered, entire living rooms turned into silent theaters. This wasn't politics as usual, this was a reckoning. Inside the chamber, the air was suffocating, heavy with the weight of history. Reporters lined the aisles, cameras perched like hawks, waiting to strike on the first stumble. At the front sat Donald Trump, jaw tight, fingers drumming the table, his lawyers whispering in his ears. He wore the same smirk that had carried him through rallies and scandals, but here, under the white-hot glare of justice, it looked brittle. Then the double door swung open. Jasmine Crockett walked in. Not hurried, not hesitant, she commanded the room. Her black suit cut sharp against the marble backdrop, her gaze unflinching. Every step echoed through the chamber like the toll of a bell. Conversations died mid-sentence, even Trump's lawyers stopped whispering. The atmosphere shifted, as if everyone present sensed they were about to witness something unforgettable. Jasmine sat, sliding a stack of folders across the desk. The camera zoomed in. Epstein files classified. The bold red stamp burned into the national consciousness. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. What names hid in those pages? What truths had been buried beneath power and privilege? The mystery itself was intoxicating, an unseen storm about to break. In the gallery, families of Epstein's victims sat rigid, holding photographs like shields. Their eyes glistened, but there was no trembling, only the quiet fury of people who had been silenced for too long. Their presence was a reminder that this was not spectacle, it was survival. The room held its breath as Jasmine leaned forward, locking her gaze on Trump. A voice cut through the silence with surgical precision, every syllable deliberate. "Mr. Trump, why did Epstein's prison videos vanish under your watch?" The effect was instantaneous. Gasps tore through the chamber. Trump's smirk collapsed. His lawyers shuffled papers, whispering frantically. Reporters bolted upright, cameras snapping like gunfire. On screens across America, hashtags erupted, timelines flooded, the question ricocheted through households and headlines alike. Trump opened his mouth, but no sound came. For once, the master of bluster had no words. Jasmine's question wasn't just a demand, it was a blade, slicing open years of secrecy, corruption, and whispered rumors. In that frozen silence, as the world leaned in, a single thought pulsed like a drumbeat across the nation. What explosive secrets are about to be revealed? Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp and defiant. "This is nothing but a witch hunt," he barked, the words echoing through the chamber like a shield forged from arrogance. "Fake news, fake charges, fake outrage, nothing here is real." His supporters in the back row shifted uncomfortably, clapping once or twice, but the sound died. In the oppressive silence that followed, Jasmine didn't flinch. She rose slowly, her hand pressing down on the stack of folders, and with a sudden snap, she slammed a single file onto the desk. The sound cracked like a gunshot, cameras flashed. The headline was already writing itself. "Here it is," she declared, her voice steady but charged. "The deal that gave a predator freedom," the deal signed by Alex Acosta, later promoted to Trump's cabinet. She held up the document for the nation to see, the redacted lines glowing like scars across the page. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Victims' families in the gallery covered their mouths, one mother breaking into muffled sobs as she clutched her daughter's photo to her chest. A father shook his head, tears streaking down his face, whispering, "This is what they hid from us." The human weight of the paper in Jasmine's hand crushed through the spectacle, turning politics into pain. Trump leaned forward, his face reddening. "That's old news." Acosta acted alone. "Everyone knows it. Don't drag me into this circus." But Jasmine's eyes locked onto him, unyielding. "Old news, tell that to the children who never got justice." Tell that to the families who were silenced by power and money. This isn't just corruption, it's betrayal. Her words thundered through the chamber, not merely an accusation, but an indictment of an entire system. The room vibrated with tension. Lawmakers shifted nervously, reporters scribbled at breakneck speed, and social media feeds lit up in real time. Jasmine's voice rose again, sharper, cutting through the air. This wasn't only a sweetheart deal for Epstein. It was a death sentence for trust in our justice system, and who benefited most? The wealthy, the powerful, and the men sitting exactly where you are, Mr. Trump. Trump slammed his palm on the desk, rattling his water glass. Lies, I had nothing to do with that. His voice cracked under the weight of the moment, a rare fracture in his usual bluster. Jasmine leaned closer, her tone dropping to a razor's edge, every syllable heavy with contempt. Then explain why the man who signed that deal ended up in your cabinet. Explain why the predator walked free while victims were forced into silence. The gallery erupted into murmurs. One lawmaker covered his mouth as if to contain the shock. Another whispered, "She's cornering him." Trump looked around desperately, his lawyers whispering frantically in his ear, but the cameras caught everything, the sweat forming at his temple, the flicker of panic in his eyes. Jasmine lifted the file again, her voice steady but laced with fire. "America, remember this page, remember this betrayal. Because the truth is simple, when justice was needed, it was sold to the highest bidder. And this," she shook the folder for emphasis, "was only the beginning." The chamber froze, breathless, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next revelation. And in that silence, the unspoken question burned into every heart. If this deal was just the beginning, how deep does the darkness truly go? The chamber still quivered from Jasmine's last words. She held the Acosta file aloft for one last second before setting it down with deliberate calm. Then her tone shifted, not the fire of accusation, but the weight of history. "This didn't begin with one deal," she said, her voice low, steady, pulling the entire room into her rhythm. "For years, Jeffrey Epstein walked through the shadows, shielded by privilege, guarded by silence, and granted favors no ordinary American could dream of." The screens behind her flickered to life, showing black and white clippings, headlines from Palm Beach police reports, the Miami Herald expose, photographs of Epstein stepping out of his mansion with a smug grin while teenage girls whispered behind him. In 2005, police tried to stop him. In 2008, prosecutors handed him freedom. In its seat by Donald Trump, gasps rippled again. The timeline was no longer abstract, it was damning, a story of deliberate protection. From the gallery, Nancy Erica Smith, lawyer for several victims, stood. Her voice cracked with fury as she spoke. "We begged for justice. Instead, we were told to be quiet, to move on. Epstein's wealth bought him mercy, while my clients carried scars the law refused to cede." She held up a letter one victim had written at 16, ignored for over a decade. Murmurs of outrage filled the chamber, lawmakers shifting uncomfortably as cameras zoomed in on the trembling paper in her hand. Jasmine nodded, then gestured toward a father in the front row. He clutched a framed photograph of his daughter, tears carving deep lines down his face. "My child believed America would protect her," he said, his voice shaking. But when she spoke, the system protected him instead. The gallery fell silent, the human cost of corruption laid bare in raw grief. Trump suddenly leaned forward, his voice booming, desperate to break the spell. "This is radical. She's radical. Using sob stories to smear me, to smear everyone who worked in government. This is disgraceful." He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his face flushed, sweat glistening under the lights. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned toward him, her eyes hard as steel, her voice quiet but lethal. "Radical," she repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Sharper. "Radical is letting a predator walk free. Radical is telling victims their lives matter less than the power of a man with friends in high places. Radical is silence." The chamber erupted in murmurs, a surge of applause breaking through despite attempts to gavel it down. Investigative journalists rose next, their reports projected on the screen. FOIA requests denied, video evidence lost, unexplained transfers of Epstein's wealth protected by shell companies tied to political donors. Each revelation was another stone added to the mountain of suspicion. Each fact another reminder of how deep the rot ran. Jasmine let the silence linger, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, across America through the cameras. "If one deal could hide Epstein's crimes," she said, her voice carrying like a verdict, "what else is buried in the dark?" The question didn't just hang in the air, it pierced it, leaving a shiver in its wake, as though the nation itself was bracing for secrets too dangerous to remain hidden. The chamber was still vibrating from Jasmine's haunting question when she reached into the stack of classified files and pulled out a thin black folder. She didn't rush, she let the silence build like a tightening noose. Cameras zoomed in, the nation leaning forward, and then like a magician revealing her final card, she snapped a folder open and held up a glossy photograph for the world to see. Gasps shot through the chamber like gunfire. There, frozen in time, was Donald Trump sitting shoulder to shoulder with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell aboard Epstein's private jet. Around them, a circle of young women smiled awkwardly, too young, their eyes betraying unease. The image was crisp, undeniable, and merciless. On television screens across America, networks cut in with breaking banners, photobomb, Trump linked to Epstein flight. Trump's smirk collapsed instantly. He lunged toward the microphone, his voice cracking. "Fake. That's fake. I've never seen that picture before in my life." His lawyers scrambled, whispering frantically, waving their arms at the committee, but Jasmine didn't blink. She slid the photo onto the projector, and the giant screen behind her illuminated every detail: flight seats, champagne glasses, even the embroidered logo on the headrest proving it was Epstein's jet. "Fake." Jasmine's voice dripped with steel. "Metadata doesn't lie. This photograph was taken July 8, 1992, confirmed by 2 separate forensic labs. And if that isn't enough," she gestured to the gallery, "we have witnesses who were there." A collective gasp rippled as a journalist rose, camera flashes exploding. The journalist raised a sworn statement, testimony from a flight attendant who had worked those flights, her words chilling in their simplicity. "Donald Trump boarded 7 times. He knew exactly where he was and who he was with." The tension reached a fever pitch. Reporters pounded their keyboards, networks interrupted programming with flashing updates. In living rooms, families clutched remotes tighter, some cried, some screamed. And across social media, hashtags detonated like bombs. Hashtag Trump Epstein photo, hashtag no more secrets. Trump stammered, his face flushed crimson. "This is a setup, a coordinated attack. I was invited. I didn't know what was happening." He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his voice rising to a shriek. "You're trying to destroy me with lies." But the words rang hollow against the brutal clarity of the photograph looming above him. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She leaned into the mic, calm, measured, devastating. "The only thing destroying you, Mr. Trump, is the truth." The chamber fell into a stunned silence, broken only by muffled sobs from the gallery and the furious hammering of the chairman's gavel. The image still burned on the screen, indelible, unforgettable, as if the whole nation had just seen a mask ripped away. Jasmine let the silence stretch until it became unbearable, then closed the folder with a decisive snap. Her eyes scanned the chamber, then locked once more on Trump. Her final words landed like a guillotine. "If this is what one photograph can reveal, what could be more damning than this?" The photograph still burned on the projector screen when Jasmine reached for a small silver device, pressing a single button. A low hiss filled the chamber, then a woman's trembling voice emerged. "They told me. I had no choice." The voice cracked, heavy with fear. The room stiffened, reporters craning forward, families leaning in, and then the words detonated. The order to close the Epstein files came. From the top, the chamber exploded. Gasps tore through the air, chairs scraped, reporters shouted over one another. Faces of Republican lawmakers twisted with panic, some shifting uncomfortably, others shaking their heads in denial. The voice on the tape was unmistakable: Pam Bondi, former Attorney General under Trump. She wasn't speaking for the cameras, she wasn't performing. This was raw, a private confession, laced with dread. Jasmine rose slowly, letting the noise crash around her, and then she turned, locking eyes on Trump. The silence sharpened like glass as she spoke, each word a dagger. "The top means you." The sentence hung there, suspended in the smoke of shock, and the chamber froze as if struck by lightning. Trump's face twisted, first pale, then crimson with rage. He slammed his palm against the desk so hard the water glass tip end spilled. "Strike it," "Strike that tape from the record!" He roared, spit catching the light as he shouted. His lawyers surged to their feet, waving frantically, demanding the committee dismiss the recording. But Jasmine didn't move. He only gestured toward the panel of experts seated at the side, who calmly confirmed into the microphone, "The recording is authentic, verify, untampered." The sound of that verdict rolled like thunder. Republicans squirmed in their seats, shifting papers, whispering among themselves, unable to mask the discomfort now plastered across their faces. A few even avoided eye contact, their silence louder than any defense. The Democrats sat stone-faced, eyes sharp, waiting for the next strike. Trump pounded the table again, his voice cracking. "It's a setup. I never gave such an order. This is a disgusting, coordinated attack." His words carried the familiar cadence of defiance, but the chamber no longer believed him. The damning calm in Jasmine's expression told the nation everything. She had him cornered. She leaned in, voice lower now, cutting, deliberate. For years, the victims were told to stay silent. For years, the files disappeared, hidden away. And now, in your own administration's voice, we hear the truth. Justice wasn't denied by accident, it was denied by design. The gallery erupted into murmurs. A mother's sob broke through the tension, while cameras zoomed in on Trump's clenched fist and blood-red face. Across America, televisions buzzed with commentary, live captions flashing bombshell, Doge ordered to close files. The world was no longer just watching, they were judging. Jasmine let the silence settle once more, her gaze fixed, her tone heavy with the weight of betrayal. "If the Department of Justice bowed to Trump," she said, her words echoing like a verdict, "what other truths have been buried in the dark?" And with that question, the chamber plunged into stunned silence, as if the very walls of the Capitol were holding their breath for the next revelation. The chamber was still vibrating from the echo of Jasmine's words when the chairman gestured toward the gallery. A man in his late 50s rose slowly, clutching a framed photograph of a girl with braces and bright eyes. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from a grief sharpened into steel. "This is my daughter," he began, his hands shaking as he held the picture high. She believed America would protect her, she believed the law was on her side. Instead, she was betrayed by Epstein, by the prosecutors, and by every official who chose silence over justice. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of muffled sobs. Trump shifted in his seat, eyes darting between his lawyers and the crying father, but he offered no words. Jasmine lowered her gaze, nodding softly in respect, then spoke, "This is not just one story. It is the story of dozens, hundreds of lives shattered, hidden under the cloak of wealth and influence." Her words rolled over the audience like a wave, the pain of one father becoming the echo of a nation. Another parent rose, a mother this time, her voice barely more than a whisper at first. "I wrote letters," she said, pulling folded papers from her purse, worn from years of handling, letters to the Department of Justice. Letters to the president, pleading for help. "I never received a reply." She unfolded one, her hands trembling, and began to read. The chamber leaned in as her voice cracked. "My daughter was 14, and no one in power cared enough to answer me." Gasps shuddered through the crowd. Even hardened journalists wiped their eyes behind their notepads. Jasmine let the silence linger, then connected the pain to a broader truth. "This is what happens," she said, her voice steady but ablaze, "when justice bends to power. Poor families, black and brown families, working-class families, they all hear the same message. Your lives matter less than the comfort of the wealthy." Epstein's case is not an exception, it is the rule. Trump slammed a fist against the table, his voice rising with frustration. This is theater, this is a disgrace, but his protest was drowned out by the raw power of testimony. For once, the family's voices were louder than his, their grief cutting through his bluster like thunder tearing through a storm. One final mother rose, tears streaking her face, her voice trembling but fierce. "You can call this political, you can call this partisan, but I call it murder of justice, and it was done under your watch, Mr. Trump." The words landed like a hammer, and the chamber erupted, gasps, murmurs, applause, all tangled into one chaotic roar. Jasmine stood again, her eyes blazing, her voice cutting clean through the nose. "If they could bury the truth of these children," she said, "if one deal could hide crimes this monstrous, what if the cover-up went deeper than anyone ever imagined?" And in that moment, The entire chamber seemed to lean forward, as if America itself was bracing for the next secret waiting to detonate. The chamber had barely settled from the eruption of parents' voices when Donald Trump surged forward, gripping the microphone with white knuckles. His face was crimson, his jaw trembling with fury. "Enough!" he roared, his voice booming through the chamber like a cannon. This entire charade is built on lies. And you, Jasmine Crockett, are nothing more than a liar in lipstick, a radical fraud trying to tear this country apart." The words hit the chamber like shrapnel. Gasps broke out. A few Republicans smirked nervously, while Democrats stiffened in outrage. Trump leaned closer, stabbing the air with his finger, his voice rising with every accusation. "You're not here for justice, you're here for revenge. You don't care about the victims, you care about power, about headlines, about destroying me because you're terrified of facing me in 2024. His words rolled like thunder, but underneath the bravado, his eyes darted nervously to the cameras. Jasmine didn't flinch. She waited for his fury to crest and break, then leaned forward, her voice low but razor-sharp, cutting through the storm with terrifying calm. "Mr. Trump, I don't fear your insults, I don't fear your bluster. What I fear is silence, the silence that buried these victims, the silence that protected men like Epstein, and the silence you now demand from us." The room hushed instantly, her words slicing clean through the nose. Then, slowly, Jasmine slid a thick binder from her stack. The camera zoomed in, the anticipation electric. She opened it with deliberate care, revealing pages marked with government stamps. "These are the official flight logs of Jeffrey Epstein's private jet," she said, her voice steady but charged with fire. "And they confirm that Donald J. Trump boarded this plane not once, not twice, but 7 times." The chamber gasped as though the air itself had been sucked out. Screens lit up behind her, projecting scanned images of the logs, each line a chilling receipt of power and privilege. Dates, times, and initials spelled it out with brutal clarity. Reporters scrambled. Cable news chirons erupted. Breaking. Flight logs linked Trump to Epstein jet 7 trips. Trump's face contorted, his mouth working furiously, but no words came at first. Finally, he slammed his fist on the desk. "Fake. Fabricated. Anyone could put my name there." His voice cracked, desperation creeping in, his lawyers frantically shuffling papers, whispering frantic rebuttals. But Jasmine didn't give him room to breathe. She turned to the chamber, raising her voice so it reached every corner and every living room across America. 7 trips, 7 times he walked onto that plane. 7 times he chose to stand shoulder to shoulder with a predator. And 7 times the truth was buried. The words crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Families in the gallery wept openly. Lawmakers leaned forward, stunned, while millions at home gripped their remotes tighter, their hearts pounding with disbelief and rage. The spectacle was no longer political theater, it was a revelation. Jasmine let the silence hang, her eyes boring into Trump, unyielding, unforgiving. Then she asked the question that would echo across the nation. If Trump was this close to Epstein, what did he know? The chamber froze, and America braced for the answer that could shatter everything. The chamber was still reeling from the flight logs when the heavy wooden doors creaked open again. Heads turned, cameras swiveled, and for a brief moment the room fell into stunned silence. A woman in a dark navy suit strode forward, her face pale but resolute, clutching a thick, sealed folder against her chest. Whispers shot through the crowd. Reporters recognized her instantly. Maureen Cummey, the very prosecutor who had won the conviction against Ghislaine Maxwell, and who had been mysteriously ousted from Trump's Justice Department. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, measuring the weight of the moment. Trump's face darkened instantly. He muttered something to his lawyers, shaking his head, his hands trembling with rage. The chair of the hearing pounded the gavel, but the energy in the chamber had shifted. It wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was theater, raw and unfiltered, playing live before the entire nation. Maureen stepped to the witness table, her voice steady, though her hands gripped a folder tightly. "I was dismissed," she began, "because I refused to stop pulling the threads that connected Epstein's network to powerful political elites." The words detonated in the chamber. Gasps erupted, journalists leapt to their feet, and the gallery buzzed with disbelief. She placed the sealed evidence folder on the table with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. "This," she said, "is what they didn't want America to see." Trump erupted instantly, slamming his fist onto the table. This is outrageous. She's a disgraced prosecutor, bitter because she lost her job. None of this is true. None of it. His voice was raw, but desperation oozed beneath the bluster. One of his lawyers stood, pointing at Maureen, shouting about illegitimate testimony, but the cameras were already zooming in, the nation already hanging on her every word. Maureen looked directly at Trump, her voice rising with conviction. You can try to erase my career, you can smear my name, but you cannot erase the evidence I carry. And you cannot bury the truth forever. The chamber erupted into chaos, lawmakers shouting over one another, reporters yelling questions, spectators gasping. The gavel pounded again and again, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the moment. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice calm but electric, slicing through the nose. Let her speak. The entire chamber quieted, the air thick with anticipation. The cameras lingered on the folder, sealed with thick red tape pen marked with the words "Confidential Doge Archives." It sat there like a live grenade on the table, daring anyone to open it. Maureen adjusted the microphone, her tone dropping into something sharper, almost personal. I was told to stop following the money. I was told to ignore the names. And when I refused, I was silenced. She glanced at Jasmine, then at the folder. But this evidence survived. And it reveals connections that reach farther than anyone here dares to admit. The room held its breath. Even Trump was momentarily frozen, his mouth open but empty of words. The spectacle had swallowed him whole. The gallery leaned forward, every set of eyes locked on that single sealed folder. And then Jasmine, her voice barely above a whisper, a carrying like thunder, asked a question echoing in every living room across America. What could be inside her evidence folder? The folder sat like a live explosive on the table, its red seals catching the glare of the cameras. The chamber leaned forward as Maureen Cummings slowly tore through the tape. Every rip echoed in the silence, each second tightening the noose of anticipation. When she finally opened it, the sound was deafening. Pages rustled like the wings of some dark truths escaping its cage. She lifted the first sheet and slid it beneath the projector. Gasps erupted instantly. It was a fragment of the Epstein client list. Names sprawled across the page, like a ledger of the powerful and untouchable. Senators, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, and then, circled not once, not twice, but multiple times, was a name too familiar to ignore: Donald J. Trump. The chamber detonated. Lawmakers shouted, reporters screamed questions, the gallery erupted into chaos. Trump's lawyers scrambled like men caught in a fire, waving papers, shouting objections, demanding the document be stricken from the record. Trump himself went pale, then red, then pale again, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He pounded the table, shouting over the din, "This is fake. A fraud. My name was used without my knowledge. This is an outrage." But the panic in his voice betrayed him. Jasmine rose to her feet, calm but burning with fury, and pointed directly at the projection, where his name glared back at him. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the uproar. "The question isn't whether your name is there, Mr. Trump." She leaned closer, her eyes unblinking. "The question is how many times." The words hit like a hammer. The chamber hushed for a heartbeat, long enough for the weight of the accusation to sink in. The gallery murmured in horror, one mother clutching her chest, another shaking her head in disbelief. The camera zoomed on Trump's clenched fists, on the beads of sweat streaking down his temple. Cummings turned another page, another fragment. More names, more circles, and Trump's appeared again, and again. The repetition was damning, each circle a wound bleeding across the screen. One lawmaker muttered, "Dear God," while another slammed his folder shut in visible disgust. Trump's lawyers rose, shouting about chain of custody, about fabricated evidence, about a deep state conspiracy, but their words drowned beneath the sound of outrage swelling in the chamber and across the nation. On television screens coast to coast, anchors struggled to keep pace, their voices cracking as breaking banners flooded the lower thirds. Client list leaked. Trump implicated multiple times. Trump finally stood, jabbing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "You will pay for this. Every single one of you will pay for this witch hunt." His voice cracked, desperation dripping from every syllable, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She let the fury wash over her, then struck with quiet precision. "You can threaten me all you want. But the truth is already written. The truth is on these pages. And the truth doesn't fear you. The chamber went still, every eye locked on the folder, on the names, on the circles that refused to be erased. The silence grew unbearable until Jasmine's voice broke it once more, this time not as an accusation, but as a warning. But what if even this list isn't the whole truth? The question lingered like a storm on the horizon, leaving America trembling at the thought of what darker secrets might still lie buried. The air inside the chamber was already poisoned with shock, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her hand hovering above a small remote. The screen behind her flickered to black, then burst alive with grainy security footage. A time stamped in the corner. August 10, 2019. The room froze. It was the night Epstein died. For 7 agonizing seconds, the footage rolled. The camera caught the dim glow of the prison corridor. A guard passed by then. Suddenly, a shadow emerged. The figure moved with precision, his steps silent even on film. He stopped at Epstein's cell, glancing once toward the lens as if daring history to watch. And on his sleeve, catching the faint light, was a patch that turned blood cold. Trump security. The chamber detonated like a bomb. Gasps, shouts, cries all colliding in a hurricane of disbelief. One reporter screamed, "Oh my God!" while another bolted to call their newsroom. The gallery erupted. Families of victims wept openly, clutching each other in horror. Across America, living rooms shook with the sound of millions yelling at their screens, hashtags igniting instantly. Hashtag Trump security. Hashtag Epstein cover-up. Trump sprang to his feet, knocking over his chair, face contorted with rage. "That's doctored. That's fake news. Lies." His voice cracked under the pressure, but Jasmine didn't blink. She pressed pause, freezing the shadowy figure mid-step, the insignia visible to every eye in the chamber. "Doctored?" she asked, her tone surgical. "Then explain the original metadata, confirmed by 3 independent labs, showing this footage has never been altered." The room roared again. One of Trump's lawyers lunged forward, demanding the clip be stricken from the record. Another Republican lawmaker slammed his fist on the desk, shouting objection. But their voices were drowned by the storm of panic now crashing over the Capitol. Even some GOP members turned pale, their whispers betraying fear that the nightmare was spiraling beyond control. Jasmine leaned closer to the mic, her voice low but cutting through like a blade. "This is not conspiracy. This is not theater. This is evidence." Her words hung heavy, forcing even the doubters to silence. She pointed back to the frozen frame. "That man entered Epstein's cell the night he died. And that insignia, his arm, ties him directly to Donald Trump's private security detail." Trump slammed the table, his voice raw with desperation. "You can't prove that was my man. You can't prove who's behind that mask." The words shot out like a defense and a confession all at once. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "Maybe you're right," she said. "Maybe the mask still hides the truth, but every mask eventually slips." The chamber fell into a breathless silence. On the screen, the still image of the shadowy figure lingered, one hand on the cell door, the other obscured by the darkness. The insignia glared back like a brand burned into the national memory. And then Jasmine delivered the final strike, her voice dropping into a whisper that somehow carried louder than the chaos before. "Who was behind that mask?" The question tore through America like an earthquake, leaving no living room, no news feed, no soul untouched by the weight of the unknown. Trump shot up from his chair like a man on fire, his face flushed red, his fist slamming against the table so hard the microphones rattled. "This is fake," he bellowed, "a deep fake. More Democrat lies," his voice echoed, bouncing off the chamber walls, but beneath the thunder there was a crack, an unmistakable note of desperation. The screen still glowed with the frozen frame of the shadowy figure, that chilling insignia visible to the entire world. Reporters were already yelling questions over one another, cameras zooming in on every twitch of Trump's face. The country watched live as he doubled down, sweat gathering on his forehead. "This is high-tech fraud," he shouted again, "and every single one of you knows it." But Jasmine was ready. She didn't flinch, didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she gestured toward the panel of experts seated behind her, cybersecurity specialists, former DOJ forensics teams, men and women whose careers were built on untangling digital lies. One by one, they leaned forward and confirmed the file was authentic. The metadata line, the compression signatures were original. No sign of tampering, no trace of fabrication. The chamber erupted again, Louder this time, a storm of disbelief crashing against Trump's denials. He jabbed his finger at Jasmine, his words now tumbling over themselves. "You planted it, you're conspiring with crooked labs." His voice cracked, almost shrill, the mask of control slipping in real time. The crowd watching at home lit up social media. #deepfake deflection trended alongside #Trump security. Jasmine let the nose simmer, then struck with precision. She leaned into her mic, her eyes never leaving Trump. "If this clip is fake, then release the full video from that night." "Where is it?" Her words cut like a scalpel, clean and merciless. The chamber fell into an eerie silence, everyone leaning forward, waiting for Trump's answer. Trump froze, his lips parting but no words escaping. For the first time, the defiance faltered. His lawyers whispered frantically into his ear, shuffling papers, but it was too late. Jasmine pressed again, harder this time. 7 seconds survived. 7 seconds they couldn't erase, but the rest? She paused, letting the silence stretch. The rest was buried, erased, vanished. The question, Mr. Trump, is my. The silence cracked like glass under a hammer. Some lawmakers shouted for order. Others demanded the full video be subpoenaed immediately. The public gallery was in chaos, half screaming in outrage, half gasping in disbelief. Trump slammed the table again, but this time it sounded weaker, almost hollow. "It doesn't exist," he roared, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. Jasmine stood tall, her voice steady, rising above the storm. If 7 seconds slipped through the cracks of their cover-up, what else is out there? What else has been erased from the record of history? The screen behind her still burned with that haunting image, frozen in time, daring America to answer. Jasmine rose slowly from her seat, her presence filling the chamber with a silence sharper than any gavel. She didn't look at Trump, she didn't look at the judges or the lawyers. Instead, she fixed her gaze straight into the cameras, the eyes of millions of Americans staring back at her in their living rooms, in bars, in airports, glued to their screens. Her voice rang steady, low, unshakable. "How many times will we let the powerful erase the truth? How many times will victims be forced into silence while predators dine with presidents? Epstein's victims deserve better, our nation deserves better." The chamber erupted, not in chaos this time, but in raw human energy. Cheers, sobs, and thunderous applause from the gallery. Across the country, hashtags exploded, trending simultaneously. #justice for Epstein victims, #no more silence, #truth or collapse. Jasmine's words were already ricocheting like bullets across cable news tickers and cell phone screens. For one electric moment, America felt united in outrage. Trump, his face twisted with fury, shoved his chair back and began storming toward the exit. The cameras pivoted, following his every step, the sound of his shoes pounding against the marble floor like a drum of defiance. But before he reached the heavy chamber doors, the gavel slammed down. The chair of the committee barked, "Mr. Trump, you will return to your seat. This is a legal proceeding, not a rally." Gasps and murmurs rippled. Trump froze, caught between defiance and humiliation. He spun back, his face a storm cloud, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "This is a disgrace. You're not a congresswoman, you're a witch hunter." His voice cracked on the last word, his anger barely masking the desperation underneath. Jasmine did not blink. "No, Mr. Trump," she said, her words sharp as glass, "this is what accountability looks like." The chamber quaked with shouting, lawmakers on both sides nearly spilling into physical confrontation. Some Republicans screamed for the hearing to be shut down, while Democrats pounded the tables, demanding subpoenas, demanding the truth. The air itself felt like it might combust. Guards shifted nervously, prepared for the worst. And then Jasmine struck again, her voice slicing through the storm. "This isn't about left or right. It isn't about me or you. It's about every family who's been told their suffering didn't matter. It's about every child who never got justice because the powerful thought they were untouchable. Not anymore, not today." Her words hit like a thunderclap, silencing even her fiercest opponents. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber hung suspended in her defiance. Trump slumped back into his seat, seething, his lawyers whispering frantically. But the damage was done. The country had seen him retreat and Jasmine rise. The camera zoomed in on her face, fire in her eyes, her voice carrying like a verdict. The only question left is this: what happens when the people demand answers? Outside the Capitol, Washington burned with nose. The sun was sinking, but floodlights and camera crews lit the streets as if it were midday. Tens of thousands had gathered, victims' families clutching framed photos, young activists hosting signs painted in red and black. Justice for Epstein's victims. No more secrets, truth over power. Their chants roared like waves slamming against concrete walls, echoing across every avenue leading to the Dome. Across the barricades, an equal force surged Trump's loyalists, waving flags, chanting witch hunt and fake news. Loudspeakers blared music, megaphones screamed denials, and fists raised high in defiance. Between the two armies of citizens, lines of riot police stood stiff, shields glinting under the floodlights. The air itself felt like it might shatter, two versions of America colliding in real time. On social media, the battle raged just as fiercely. Jasmine's name trended worldwide. #Crockett the Courageous flashing across millions of screens. News anchors called her the voice of a generation, the woman who had dared to rip the mask off decades of corruption. But in the same feeds, fury bold. #Stand with Trump rallied millions, accusing her of treason, branding her a puppet of the establishment. The nation wasn't just divided, it was at war with itself. As the night deepened, the protests swelled into chaos. Fireworks exploded overhead, some celebratory, some weaponized. A bottle shattered against a police barricade. Smoke rose from the streets, clashes broke out in pockets, tear gas fired. Sirens wailing, the ground trembling with the stampede of bodies. Families who had come to grieve were suddenly choking on gas, while men in red caps threw fists and fury at anyone who dared hold a sign of truth. The Capitol steps had become a battlefield of flesh and fire. Inside, Jasmine's words still echoed like church bells tolling across a wounded nation. For the victims' families, she had given voice to their grief. For ordinary Americans watching at home, she had given them a reason to believe in justice again. But outside, the fury threatened to drown her. Trump's allies capitalized on the chaos, storming TV networks to call her a fraud, a liar, a destroyer of peace. And still, her name wouldn't vanish, it only grew louder. One camera panned over the crowd, catching a moment that would replay on every network. A young girl, no older than 16, climbing onto a light pole, holding a handmade sign above her head that read, "I believe Jasmine." She was crying, shaking, but her voice carried as thousands chanted her words back in unison. That image, the trembling girl with fire in her eyes, spread like wildfire, fueling hope even as violence threatened to consume the night. As midnight neared, the streets outside the Capitol had become a living reflection of America itself, half ablaze with rage, half ablaze with hope. Jasmine Crockett's name was no longer just a politician's. It was a banner under which millions rallied, and millions more swore vengeance. That as smoke curled into the night sky and helicopters thundered overhead, one question loomed larger than the Capitol itself: will Jasmine stand or fall under the weight of a divided nation? The chamber was suffocating when Jasmine Crockett re-entered. Outside, America was on fire, sirens, smoke, and chanting still bleeding through the thick marble walls. But inside, silence cut like a blade. Every camera zoomed in on Jasmine as she placed a single folder on the table, her voice steady but laced with fire. "Within 48 hours, I demand the release of every Epstein file. No more excuses, no more delays." A ripple of gasps swept the room. Republican leaders shifted in their seats, faces pale, hands clenching at the edges of their desks. One senator rose, his voice trembling beneath forced authority. "That request compromises national security. Sensitive intelligence alliances, names, reputations go unravel." "This is reckless," his words echoed, but no one leaned forward. No one applauded. The fear in his voice betrayed him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her eyes locking on Trump across the chamber, then on the Republican bloc beside him. "National security is not a shield for national shame. We've used that excuse to bury crimes, to silence victims, to protect the powerful while the powerless rot in silence. Enough," her words thundered, and suddenly the gallery erupted, families of Epstein's victims rising to their feet, clapping, some weeping, their grief transforming into applause that refused to die down. Trump slammed his fist on the table, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. "This is a disgrace. This is a circus," he bellowed, his lawyers scrambling to contain him. But Jasmine raised her voice over his, unwavering. Disgrace is what happens when justice bends to wealth. Circus is when predators throw money, politicians, and walk free. The people are watching, Mr. Trump. They will not forget. The chamber fractured. Republicans hurled accusations. Radical, traitor, enemy of order. But each word fell flat under the weight of Jasmine's demand. Democrats banged their fists on the table in solidarity, and the gallery's chants of "release the files" rolled like thunder through the vaulted ceilings. Even the cameras caught moments of doubt flickering across the faces of Trump's allies, men and women who knew that if those files surfaced, their names might be in them too. Then came the twist. A clerk stumbled in mid-session, clutching an envelope stamped "Top Secret." Whispers exploded as the envelope was passed to the presiding chair. The chair's hands trembled, refusing to open it under the gaze of the cameras. Jasmine seized the moment. That's not just paper. That's a piece of America's buried truth. The longer you keep it sealed, the louder this country will burn. The chair froze, caught between duty and terror, while Trump's face drained of color. The air in the chamber grew electric, tension pulling every breath taut. One question gripped every mind watching live. If those files were released, whose careers would crumble and whose lives would never be the same again? Trump erupted like a storm, his voice booming through the chamber microphones. "I'll sue every one of you. This is defamation. This is treason." His words were spit like bullets, shaking the chamber as Republican allies leapt to their feet, shouting over each other. Security moved closer to the dais, unsure whether to protect him or the process itself. The broadcast left to millions, refused to cut away America, was watching chaos unfold in real time. Jasmine Crockett slammed her palm against the oak table with a crack that silenced the room. "This is not about your lawsuits, not about your legacy. This is about their lives." She pointed toward the gallery where victims' families sat, faces wet with tears, hands clutched together in grief. The camera zoomed in, capturing every sob, every trembling lip, every shattered parent who had been denied justice for decades. It wasn't just their grief anymore, it was America's grief, raw and collective. Trump's face twisted red, veins bulging as he leaned into his microphone. "They're lying. They're being used. This is a setup, Jasmine. You're nothing but a radical fraud." His insults cut the air, but his voice trembled with something new: fear. The chamber felt it. The viewers at home felt it. His bluster was cracking. Jasmine stood tall, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "The truth doesn't need to shout, Mr. Trump. It only needs to be seen. And today, America has seen you." The uproar surged again. Democrats pounded the table in unison, a chorus of defiance. Republicans scrambled, some trying to drown Jasmine out, others sinking back in their chairs, eyes darting nervously as if calculating the cost of staying loyal. On the streets outside, the chants of thousands vibrated against the chamber walls. "Release the files. Release the files." It was no longer politics, it was a reckoning. Suddenly, a monitor flickered to life with an unexpected fee. Outside the Capitol, protesters held giant screens projecting Jasmine's words in real time. Every sentence echoed, magnified, reverberating through the nation. Trump's threats of lawsuit seemed small against the tidal wave of collective outrage. He rose halfway from his chair, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "You don't know what you're playing with. You don't know what's at stake." Jasmine's reply was ice cold. "What's at stake, Mr. Trump, are the lives destroyed while men like you hid behind power. What's at stake is whether America still belongs to the people or to predators, protected by silence." The chamber fell still, every word hanging heavy as lead. Cameras captured Trump sinking back into his chair, his bravado collapsing into a grim, silent rage. But even in silence, his eyes burned with calculation. Because if Trump was cornered, everyone knew one thing: he always had one last card hidden up his sleeve. The question was, what final card did he have left to play? Trump lurched forward, his hands trembling but his voice feigning triumph. From a folder that seemed prepared for this exact moment, he pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it high. "Here. This is proof I had nothing to do with Epstein. A DOJ memo clearing my name, sign, sealed, official." The chamber buzzed with confusion. Cameras zoomed in on the page as if truth itself had been written in black ink. For a fleeting second, Trump's smirk returned. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She motioned for the document, her calm composure like a predator circling its prey. that. Trump hesitated, then tossed it across the table as though daring her. Jasmine spread it open before the chamber, her sharp eyes scanning line by line. A pause, then her lips curled into a deadly smile. "Interesting, Mr. Trump, because this memo you've staked your innocence on." She lifted the page high for all to see. Wasn't even written on DOJ letterhead. The seal is a digital copy, and the signature, she stabbed her finger at the page, was cut and pasted from an unrelated case file. Gasps exploded across the room. Lawyers scrambled, Trump's team whispering frantically, faces pale as the deception unraveled in real time. A forensic document analyst, summoned earlier by Jasmine, stepped forward with a magnified projection of the memo. Side by side, the chamber watched as the screen revealed pixel mismatches, copy-paste artifacts, and metadata proving the file had been altered just weeks ago by a private server linked to Trump's own political action committee. Trump's voice cracked into a shout. "No. Lies. This is all stage." But his words landed flat, drowned out by the collective roar of outrage. Jasmine leaned closer, her voice cutting like a blade. "You tried to save yourself with a forgery. But instead, you've shown America how far you'll go to bury the truth. This isn't exoneration, it's your undoing." Cameras captured Trump's mask of defiance shatter into something raw humiliation. The gallery erupted, some screaming, others crying, the nation itself holding its breath as the so-called evidence crumbled before their eyes. On social media, #surge, #forged memo, #Trump busted, #no way out. And as Jasmine dropped the fraudulent memo onto the table like a piece of rotten fruit, her voice pierced the silence. "If this was your last car, Mr. Trump, then what comes next?" The chamber had turned into a storm, every word, every revelation echoing like thunder. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, her gaze locked on Trump as if she could strip away the last of his defenses with her eyes alone. Her voice, steady but carrying the weight of millions watching, cut through the chaos. "Mr. Trump, do you deny that under your administration, justice died with Jeffrey Epstein?" The words hit like a gavel, final and unyielding. For a moment, the room froze, Trump's mouth opened, then snapped shut. He gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Cameras zoomed in, every channel broadcasting the raw silence of a man cornered. He glanced toward his lawyers, but they offered no rescue. He looked to the Republican allies behind him, but their faces betrayed only fear. The silence stretched on, unbearable, until it became louder than any denial. Whispers swept the chamber like a wildfire. Reporters typed furiously, victims' families clutched one another as tears flowed, and lawmakers leaned forward in disbelief. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She simply waited, her question hanging in the air like a sword above his head. Trump finally shook his head slightly, not in denial, but in refusal, a refusal to answer, a refusal to speak, hiding behind the safety of silence. The chamber erupted, gasps, boos, cries. It was as if America itself had spoken through the collective roar. Silence, in that moment, became the most damning confession of all. On screens across the nation, Chiron screamed, "Trump refuses to answer." Social media exploded, hashtags trending in seconds, #justice die, #Trump silent, #Crockett strikes. Jasmine leaned forward, her words sharp enough to slice through the uproar. "History will remember this silence. And so will every victim robbed of justice." Trump's face flushed red, but he stayed mute, trapped in a corner he could no longer fight his way out of. For the first time, his power looked brittle, his bluster reduced to nothing before the weight of truth. The gallery stood, clapping, shouting, crying, an eruption of reckoning echoing beyond the chamber walls. The moment felt less like politics and more like Judgment Day. And as the cameras captured every second, Jasmine's final question lingered, unanswered but devastating. Will justice finally be served? Across America, the silence of Donald Trump reverberated louder than any denial. Within hours, polls flashed across every network. 68% of Americans now believed Trump had covered up Epstein's crimes. The numbers were staggering, a tidal wave of public opinion crashing against the last walls of his defense. Protesters filled the streets, holding candles for Epstein's victims and chanting Jasmine Crockett's name as if she were the only voice left willing to fight for the truth. Inside the chamber, Jasmine remained composed, though the weight of history pressed down on her shoulders. Commentators called her courage the moment justice found its voice, while others warned she had just painted a target on her back. The air buzzed with triumph, but it was laced with unease, a bittersweet recognition that exposing corruption was only the first step. Accountability was another mountain entirely. On live TV, anchors replayed Trump's silence again and again, dissecting his every twitch, every refusal to speak. Hashtags spiraled into a digital storm. Hashtag Trump silent. Hashtag justice die. Hashtag Crockett rises, turning a congressional clash into a national reckoning. Yet, amid the euphoria, there was a shadow. Victims' families asked the question that haunted every viewer: would silence alone ever put anyone behind bars? Jasmine stood before the press that night, her voice firm yet heavy with the gravity of what had unfolded. "This isn't my victory," she declared. "It belongs to the voices too long ignored, to the survivors who deserve more than headlines. Today, America heard the truth. But tomorrow, we must demand justice." Her words rippled outward, carried on the wind of a divided nation. Some wept with gratitude, others burned with fury, and still others clung to denial. The nation had delivered its verdict not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Yet the battle was far from over. Trump still had allies, powerful ones, who would stop at nothing to bury the flames Jasmine had ignited. For every cheer, there was a threat; for every candle-lit vigil, a counter-protest in rage. The story was no longer about Epstein alone, it was about the soul of America, torn between truth and power. And as Jasmine walked out of the Capitol, her silhouette framed against the glare of flashing cameras, one question loomed like thunder on the horizon: if this is just the beginning, what storms lie ahead? America awoke to a nation on edge. Every front page screamed the same headline in bold black letters: Crockett versus Trump shakes nation. Cable networks replayed the moment Trump fell into silence as if it were the Zapruder film of a new era, a frame-by-frame collapse of unchecked power. Jasmine Crockett's name surged through every household, not just as a congresswoman, but as a folk hero, her defiance echoing in barbershops, churches, union halls, and classrooms across the country. For the first time in years, survivors of Epstein's crimes stepped forward with something dangerously close to hope. A mother held her daughter's hand outside the courthouse, whispering through tears. She finally made them listen. A father, long dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, now found reporters shoving microphones in his face, asking about his fight for justice. Their voices, once silenced, now swelled into a national chorus that rattled even the coldest halls of power. But the reckoning was not without peril. Trump's allies painted Jasmine as a radical threat, spinning narratives of a witch hunt designed to destroy the GOP. Talk radio fumed, militias muttered, and threats poured in by the hour. Yet for every venomous call, there were 10 more voices rising in solidarity: mothers of the disappeared, workers cheated out of wages, veterans abandoned by the system, all seeing in Jasmine's stand a reflection of their own battles. On the Senate steps, a spontaneous crowd gathered, holding candles that flickered against the night sky like a constellation of resistance. Chants of truth, justice, Crockett reverberated through the air, powerful enough to make even jaded political insiders pause. America was shifting, one heartbeat at a time. And yet, beneath the rising tide of hope, a haunting question lingered like smoke in the distance. But can hope survive without justice? The Capitol was empty now, its marble halls echoing only with the ghost of the storm that had shaken the nation. Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, the roar of the chamber replaced by silence heavy enough to press on her chest. Her hands, still trembling from the confrontation, traced the edges of the manila folders stacked on her desk, reminders of lives broken, voices drowned out, truths buried. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling as memories bled into the present. The boarded-up houses of her childhood block, the sound of sirens piercing the night, the quiet strength of her mother working double shifts to keep food on the table. She remembered watching neighbors crushed by a justice system that never seemed to work for them, fathers locked away, mothers ignored, children forced to grow up too fast. These weren't just statistics, they were her people. They were the reason she fought. The camera of history seemed to close in on her face as she whispered into the darkness, a monologue sharp enough to cut through time itself. I fight because silence has never protected us. I fight because justice is not a privilege, it is a right. And if I fall, then let me fall, making sure the next generation knows they were never invisible. Her reflection in the office window was not just her own, it carried the weight of every victim who had been told to be quiet, every community told to wait its turn, every dream deferred. For the first time, she wondered if the fire she had unleashed could no longer be contained. And as dawn's first light crept across Washington, the question pulsed in her mind like a drumbeat of destiny. Will her fight ignite a new movement? The storm had passed, but the sky above the Capitol still crackled with the weight of history. Jasmine Crockett stood at the top of the marble steps, framed by floodlights and cameras, the echo of chants rolling through the night like thunder. Below her, a sea of faces, victims, families, protesters, skeptics, believers gathered shoulder to shoulder, united by fury, grief, and hope. Her voice rose, steady but burning with fire. No one is above the law, not Epstein, not Trump, not anyone. Justice delayed is justice denied. The words ricocheted off the stone pillars and into the streets, carried by the wind, repeated by thousands of mouths until it became a chorus, a war cry. Tears streamed down cheeks, fists punched the air, chants swelled louder. Justice now, justice now. Jasmine scanned the crowd, mothers clutching photos of daughters, veterans holding flags, students holding cardboard signs soaked by the night's rain. This wasn't just a rally, it was a reckoning. For a moment, she felt the past and present collapse into one, every silenced voice rising together through hers. She lifted her gaze straight into the cameras, locking eyes not just with the crowd, but with the entire nation watching from their living rooms, their phones, their sleepless nights. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through bone. Then, she asked the only question that mattered, her voice both a challenge and a plea. Do you believe America is ready to face its truth? The crowd erupted, the sound rolling like an earthquake across the city. The screen froze on Jasmine's face, unflinching, defiant, immortal. In every moment of history, there comes a choice: silence or courage. Jasmine's fight reminds us that truth is not handed down by the powerful. It is demanded by ordinary people who refuse to look away. Justice is never guaranteed, it must be claimed, defended, and carried forward, even when the cost feels unbearable. Our stand shows us that one voice can echo into millions if it speaks with conviction. When injustice stares you in the face, will you stay silent or will you raise your voice for truth? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.